Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in and thank you for choosing to get one of our G&G Sewing Society kits this month to make the Lee Kew Skirt. So in this video I want to just give you some hints and tips and things that you might want to think about when you come to make your skirt. The video doesn't replace the instructions, so still sort of follow along with them, but hopefully some of the things that I just highlight to you will just make the process a little bit easier or give you some ideas of other things that you might want to do. So first of all, when you do open your kit, inside it you are going to find the buttons, the matte black buttons that go with the skirt, some Gutermann Sew All thread, you've got your sewing machine needles in a size 70, so that's perfect for this lovely lightweight viscose fabric, the G&G woven label and the made to measure card, so you can just make some notes on your project and what size you made, and just it's nice to just slip that in with the pattern for the next time that you make it. And then some lightweight interfacing. Of course you've got the pattern itself as well, and then you've got 1.7 meters of this gorgeous Dashwood Studios viscose fabric. It's beautiful, the colours in it are just lovely. It's really nice. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you open your kit is probably pre-wash your fabric. So I pre-washed mine at 30 degrees on an 800 spin cycle, so it's a bit of a gentler spin, and then I just left it to air dry. It dries pretty quickly, and then before you actually come to cut the fabric out, just make sure that you give it a really good press, just get it nice and flat. Sometimes viscose can feel like it's going very slightly sort of crispy or a bit harder when it's wet and then when it's drying, but I promise as soon as you iron it and you've got steam in your iron as well, it just goes lovely and buttery and soft and sort of fluid again. So then in terms of actually choosing a size on the pattern, so the size that I made for the sample was a size 8, but which is what I would sort of normally make when I make this pattern, but by the time I ended up making the sample and then we were coming to photograph it, basically I'm too pregnant for it to fit me now. So Meg modelled it for it, so it's her that you see, that you saw in the images on the listing when you got the kit. But what I would suggest that you do is that it is quite fitted at the waist. There's only an inch of ease at the waist, so but it might be worth deciding where you actually want the skirt to sit on your body. You know, what sort of level around your waist do you actually want it to sit. Measure what your measurement is at that point, and then have a look at the finished garment measurements to sort of decide what size you actually want to make. There is quite a lot of ease at the hips. There's about 9 inches of ease, which gives the skirt that lovely sort of floaty, kind of swirly vibe to it. So you've got a bit more to work with there. So yeah, I would say it's more like the waist measurement that you want to kind of get right. So when you come to cut your fabric out, if this is the first time that you've worked with viscose, or if you've worked with it before, then you'll know that you just need a little bit more patience when you come to cut it out, because it can slip around quite a lot. So you want to just spend a bit more time sort of getting it really nice and kind of smooth and flat on your table. Sometimes it helps to actually pin the selvages together, just so that you're kind of fixing it at that point, and then you can smooth everything from there, because it does just tend to shift a lot. Because you have quite a fairly long length of fabric, it's probably unlikely that you've got a long enough cutting table to have like the whole amount of fabric out at the same time. I would suggest either, once you've got it folded in half with the selvages together, either sort of folding the fabric up so that it's all kind of stacked on the table, or maybe having a chair over the edge of the table just to take the weight of the fabric, because if you let the fabric just hang off the edge of the table, it can sort of just create a drag, or kind of not stretch it, but can kind of pull it out of shape a little bit when you come to cut it. So it's better that there's no sort of strain on the fabric when you come to cut it out, that it's all just, you know, the weight of it is all supported either on the table or on a chair when you come to cut it, and just lots of time, yeah, just kind of smoothing it out. Plenty pins, you know, when you pin your pattern pieces onto the fabric, make sure that you use plenty pins to do that. If you've got a cutting mat that is big enough, then you might want to use a cutting mat and a rotary cutter. So whatever sort of method you prefer, but it does just take a little bit more sort of time and effort when you come to cut out viscose, because it is quite slippery. In terms of pattern matching, I would say don't worry about it. The pattern's quite abstract and it's not really in sort of like uniform lines or columns, so I would just kind of go for whatever. But do just check that you have got the fabric the right way up, because it is very subtly a one-way design. You know, there is a top and a bottom to it. So just make sure that you're sort of paying attention to that really when you come to cut your pieces out, that you cut it out the right way up. So when you come to put the darts in this skirt, that's one of the sort of first steps that you have to do. I thought I'd just show you the way that I do darts, because I know everybody might have a kind of different way, so I'll just show you the way that works for me. If you've got your own way that works, that's obviously totally fine, but sometimes it's sort of interesting to see what other people do. So to mark my darts onto the fabric, what I usually do is I'll make a little snip in the widest point of the dart where the little notches are. So just make a tiny little snip within the seam allowance there, and then while I've still got my pattern on top of the fabric, I'll just make a really tiny little stitch, like just literally taking the needle in and out virtually on the same point, but obviously not quite right at the point of the dart. And I'll just make sure that I've got enough thread that there's 2 quite long thread tails on there. And then you have to just be careful when you're taking the paper pattern off that you don't actually pull the thread out by mistake. So you just sort of hold it in position while you take the paper pattern off, and then you come to separate your 2 layers of fabric, and then before the thread sort of comes all the way through, just cut the thread, so it means that you're left with a bit of thread in each side of the fabric for the left and right sides of the garment. And then when I actually come to sort of then mark it in preparation for sewing it, what I do is I'll fold the fabric so that right sides are together, and I'll match up the little notches that I'd cut into the seam allowance and pin them together. And then once I've fixed them together and pinned them together, I'll then just make sure that my little thread marker is like right on the fold of the fabric that's created. And then I'll just put some more pins in to hold that into position. And then I like to use a Chaco liner pen. You could use any sort of chalk you've got. It does help if it's quite sharp though, because you're drawing in a stitch line here. And then I've got a little ruler that I use, but you could just use anything that had a straight edge, not actually measuring anything here. And then basically it's like you're connecting the points. So you're drawing a line from where those little notches are to the point of the dart, just drawing a straight line, and then that's what you stitch over. And then when you do come to stitch it on the machine, always start at the widest point of the dart, do a little reverse there, and then come towards the point of the dart. And you really want to be getting those last kind of 2-3 stitches of the dart, like almost like parallel to the fold, like really close, like literally so close. If you come in quite sharply, that's when you get like a little bubble at the end of the dart. So the key really is getting those last stitches just so close to the fold, and then just letting the needle drop off the edge, making sure that you've got long enough thread tails when you pull it out the machine that you can then just tie a knot in it, as opposed to reversing, especially on a thicker fabric like that. You don't want a back stitch at the point of the dart, it's just going to be too bulky. And then the final stage of the dart is pressing it. So remember, darts are creating 3D shape and form in a garment. So when you come to press it, you're not going to be able to like just have this bit of fabric flat on the ironing board anymore. Some people use a tailor's ham to sort of drape the fabric round. So if you've got one of them, great, you can use a tailor's ham. If you've not got a tailor's ham, I'll have the right side of the fabric facing down onto the ironing board, and then I'll just use the edge of the iron to push that flap of the dart usually towards the centre of the garment, and then just sort of putting a little bit of tension on it just to make sure I really open out the seam that's created when you sew the dart effectively, but then kind of almost holding the fabric up a little bit at the point of the dart, so it's not lying totally flat on the ironing board. And then I'll just use the tip of the iron to kind of move in a sort of gentle circular motion at the point of the dart, just to kind of round it out. And it just helps to create more sort of 3D shape at the point of the dart, basically. So hopefully that's given you some tips. But as I said, if you've got your own way of doing darts that sort of you like and works for you, then that's totally fine. There's always lots of different ways to do things in dressmaking. So the next thing I would suggest that you do is put the facing onto the centre front of the skirt, and just make sure that you've got the facing the right way up. The pattern piece is very subtly, it's just shaped really slightly differently at the bottom, so just make sure that you've got that, because it does kind of look like a rectangle. Just make sure you've got it the right way up when you come to put it on the skirt. And then the other thing that I just wanted to sort of point out is to make sure that you understitch the facing as well. So that's when you're stitching onto the facing, but you're catching the seam allowances of when you sewed the facing onto the main skirt, so you're catching that underneath. So it's a line of stitching that's just on the inside of the skirt. Just don't miss out that step. It's not totally, I didn't think it was totally clear in the little line drawing. It does say it in the words and the text of the instructions, but If you're anything like me, sometimes you just sort of glance at the picture and quickly move on without actually reading it, so just watch out for that one. The other thing that I did for the facing that was very slightly different from the instructions was, instead of zigzagging that raw edge on the inside edge of the facing, I just did a really narrow hem. So I just pressed it back once and then just stitched really close to the edge. I just thought that would be a sort of sleeker, kind of neater finish on the inside of the facing rather than a zigzag. Or if you've got an overlocker, of course, you could just do that as well. And then once you've got that sort of finished edge then of the centre front of the skirt, it's quite a good time to try it on, because then it's easier to adjust the side seams. If you are going to be trying your skirt on and sort of fitting it before you attach your waistband, I would recommend stay stitching round the top edges of the front and back pieces of the skirt, because this kind of viscose fabric can stretch out fairly easily at the raw edges, so just stay stitch it to sort of stabilise it before you kind of try it on. Another thing that you can do at the side seams, just to sort of make it a little bit different, kind of make it more special, is do a French seam. That's what I did on my sample skirt. So if you've not done a French seam before, it's pretty easy. It's basically like sewing the seam, but you sew it twice, but it's just nice because it hides all the raw edges on the inside. So it's a nice way to finish it off, especially in a lighter weight fabric like this. So what you have to do is, instead of putting right sides of the fabric together first, you have to put wrong sides of the fabric together first. And I then sew a seam, about half centimetre seam. And so sew that first, and then I'll just trim the raw edges. So if the fabric sort of started to fray a little bit, just get rid of any of those threads there just now at that point. And then the key to getting it really crisp is pressing it before the next stage. So you want to open that seam out and press the little sort of mini tiny seam allowance that you've got. Just press it to one side, it won't matter what side you do, and just make sure you're really opening out. I use the edge of the iron to sort of push it to the side, and then fold the skirt again so that the right sides are together, and again press it along that seam line that you stitched before. So then everything's sort of lying nice and flat, and then back to the machine, and then you stitch it again. So I usually use another half a centimetre seam allowance. The seam allowance in this pattern is 1.5 centimetres, but the reason I just do it like 0.5 centimetre and 0.5 centimetre, which I know only makes one, is just because sometimes there can be like slight inaccuracies in that. You might go like a little bit over, so and it is nice to have a nice narrow French seam as well, so that's why I do it that way round. So then I just stitch it again, so it just means that you end up with this little sort of fold of fabric effectively on the inside, but there's no raw edges, and then it just looks like a nice seam from the outside. So then you can just press that to one side. But I would say definitely sort of pin it and check the fit at the waist before you put your French seams in, because it's quite hard to then adjust the side seam once you've got a French seam there. So yeah, just get the fit right first before you do that kind of seam finish. So for hemming the dress, what I would suggest you do is let the hem drop out for a day or a couple of days before you actually sew it. So once you've got the main kind of construction bits of your skirt all together and you've got your waistband on, is to hang it up. And then, you know, like hang it up in your wardrobe or just hang it over the back of the door or something, and then just let gravity sort of take effect on the skirt and just let the fabric kind of drop out. And then you'll see if there's any sort of slight discrepancies in the height of the hem anywhere. It's really common for that to happen with lightweight fabric like this viscose. So you can just even that out before you hem it. I then hemmed mine using a really narrow hem, and the easiest way I find to do that is to, first of all, before you've sort of turned anything back or pressed anything, is to sew a stitch line on the machine about 5 millimetres, 0.5 centimetre away from the bottom raw edge of the fabric. So just sew that all the way around, and then you use that like a pressing guide basically. So then you take it to the machine, you press to the wrong side of the fabric along that stitch line all the way around, and then just turn it by the same amount again, and it just gives you a bit more help when you're turning such a narrow turning. So it's, you know, it's quite a fine narrow hem, and it's hard to do that without any guidance. So the stitch line just sort of helps with that. And then once you've got it pressed in place, the fabric presses so well, which is great. Then just stitch it on the machine, and you've got your nice narrow hem. And then there's just a little bit of hand sewing just to sort of secure the facing to the inside of the skirt at the centre front. And then it's time to come and put the buttons on. So the buttonhole markings that are on the pattern for this look a bit like a cross with a kind of circle round them. So what I did to mark my buttonholes then onto my skirt was I used the buttonhole foot that comes with my machine to kind of help with that. So the machine I use is a Brother machine, and it comes with a one-step buttonhole function. But I think even if you've not got a one-step buttonhole, the sort of little tool that you use to do your buttonhole foot will probably work in a similar way. But what you do is just push the top of the foot up a little bit, and you put your button in that little back section, and it sets the distance between these 2 points on the side of the foot, and that is going to be the size of your buttonhole for the button that you've got. So then what I did was I just lined the pattern piece up alongside my actual skirt when I was ready to put the buttonholes on. And with a one-step buttonhole, you only have to mark the starting point of the button, because the foot tells the machine how long it has to be. So you're not, when you mark, if you're using a one-step buttonhole foot, you only have to mark one point of the buttonhole. You don't need to mark like the top and bottom of it. So I just centered that little those little markers on the foot of the machine over where that circle cross marking was in the pattern, and then just kind of lined it up onto my skirt to then place a pin where I wanted the buttonhole to start, and then it would go up from there. And then going off of the pattern, the rest of the buttonholes are 4 centimetres apart, so then I just literally measured 4 centimetres down from that first point that I'd made, and just mark the start of the rest of the buttonhole. So then when I actually come to sew on the machine, I'm just lining that pin up with the little marker on the foot of the machine, and then the machine just sort of takes care of the rest and stitches the buttonhole. You just want to make sure that you're always stitching the buttonhole the same distance from that sort of finished edge of the skirt, just so that they all kind of line up. And then for the buttonhole that is on your waistband, just make sure that you're centering the buttonhole on the waistband when you come to actually sew it on the machine. So when you come to sew the buttons on, obviously you can do it by hand. It's quite a nice sort of relaxing hand sewing job to do while you're watching TV in the evening or something, but you can sew buttons on with the machine as well. And on my machine, I've got this buttonhole foot that sort of holds the button in place, and then there's a specific buttonhole stitch that you can use as well. Effectively just does like a little zigzag on the spot, but it's just a much quicker way to sew the buttons on, basically. So what I did to mark where I wanted the buttons to go was just, once it had the buttonholes themselves sewn onto the skirt, then I just matched up the 2 centre front edges and put a little pin where I wanted the buttons to actually go, and then just used that where I'd put my little pin in just as a marker, and lined that up in the machine, and then just sort of let the machine do the job. So you kind of, once you've got your machine set up to do it, it's fairly easy, but it's a bit quicker than hand sewing. But of course you can totally do it that way as well if you fancy. So I really hope you enjoy making your skirt. If you've got any questions, please let me know in the comments of this video and I can help there, or you can always just email or call the shop if you're getting stuck as well. But I'm sure you're going to love it, and it does make a really beautiful garment, so nice and bright and flowery and summery. Thanks so much again for buying one of our kits, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.